All right, hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. We're just gonna go ahead and get started. You all are very prompt, so thank you so much for dedicating your time here on this Friday evening. Um, Before we get started, I'll just want to start with an opening prayer. So we'll just do that. All right. Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you for this time that you've given us to have this panel discussion on mental health, to have this conversation about something that is often not discussed enough in the church and within different communities. I just pray that through this conversation, people leave, they don't leave the same way that they came. I pray that people are able to leave with a transformed mind, transformed perception on mental health. And I also just pray that this impacts somebody. And I just thank you for this opportunity that you've given us, Lord, to just have this panel and have people to speak and talk about mental health, and also just get some of their questions addressed as well. And we just thank you for the impact that we're going to have now and moving forward. I'm just getting this conversation started. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So, hello, everyone. My name is Abena, and I am the moderator for tonight on this Transformed Minds, a conversation on mental health. So tonight, basically, our goal is to destigmatize talking about mental health, specifically within the church and then also within the African community. Of course, this conversation is not exclusive to just those communities. Those are some communities we want to highlight tonight. We're going to talk about mental health, what it is, what it isn't, and also what we can do about it for ourselves and for others, as well as a number of different topics. And so we hope that you all will leave with a transformed mind, which I would say has a dual meaning. So a transformed mind in that transforming perceptions on mental health. People have a lot of misconceptions, or a lot of stigma that's associated with it. And then also just having a transformed mind in terms of having a healthier mind as a result of this conversation. And I also say this is just kind of an introductory conversation. There's a lot that we could cover, but we can only cover so much in the time. So that's just a note, and hopefully in the future we can have a follow-up conversation about this. But this is a good start for normalizing having these conversations within the church, and then also normalizing talking to healthcare providers. And of course, we have some as panelists on the call tonight. And just also a note, our Bible verse for reference tonight is 1 Peter 5, verse 7. And also just wanted to make a note about our flyer. I'm sure many of you have noticed that there's a lot of green on the flyer. And that was very intentional because green is the color for mental health awareness. So we also wanted to kind of raise awareness in that way. And also just a quick disclaimer. We do have some healthcare professionals on the call tonight, but please do not take the information today as a substitute for professional medical advice. Of course, talk to a provider and get information about your own specific situation. So just wanted to provide that brief disclaimer. And once again, thank you all for coming tonight. So first, I'm just going to get started with some introductions of our panelists. First up, we have Mrs. Annie Shun. She's a nurse and has been one for over 10 years now. She has work experience in a variety of different areas, including acute care, long-term care, disease and care management, as well as medical coding projects. She received a nursing degree from Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. And she also wears a number of hats outside of her professional life. She's a daughter, a sister, an auntie, godmother, wife, and mother. And her favorite Bible verses are Luke 1, verse 37, and Exodus 14, verse 14. Mrs. Ashon, could you please wave so they know who you are? Thank you. Up next, we have Reverend Dr. George Adementa, and he is the senior pastor of Agape Life Ministries, Inc. He's here per my personal request, just to have him kind of set the tone for this conversation, and also, like I said, talking about mental health in the church. So thank you again, Pastor, for your time and willingness to be a panelist tonight. All right, and then up next, we have Dr. Ifani Olele. He is a board-certified psychiatrist specializing in anxiety, depression, ADHD, and other common mental health conditions. And he offers individualized care to patients in the greater Washington, D.C. area. He completed his undergraduate studies in psychobiology at UCLA. He also received a medical degree from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, and he also holds an MBA from St. Joseph's University, as well as a Master of Science from Hampton University. And he also has received training on maternal health at the Salini Institute and Cognitive Behavior Therapy at the Beck Institute. And he is also the founder and CEO of Genesis Psychiatric Solutions. Dr. Olele, could you please wave so they know who you are? Great, thank you. And then finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Brian Sackey. He is a DC Metro native, so he's from the area, well, at least the area where I'm at currently. He completed undergraduate training at the University of Maryland College Park, and he received his Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Howard University. He established the Pharmacy Initiative Leaders Program, Pills for Short, which has since transformed into a nationwide nonprofit organization dedicated to providing premier resources for pharmacy enthusiasts in underserved communities. He's also a founding member of the first ever pharmacy-focused Medical Reserve Corps in the nation. He currently serves as a psychopharmacologist at the San Antonio VA, as well as an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin College of Pharmacy. He's also the CEO of the Pills program and is involved in several national pharmacy organizations. So that's Dr. Sackey for you. Can you give a wave to the audience as well? All right, thank you so much, panelists, for being here tonight. I'm gonna direct my first question to Pastor George. So Pastor George, can you please speak to us about why this topic of mental health is important to discuss in our community? And when I say community, I mean within the church as well as African community. Yeah, so I'll leave you to answer that one.
Okay. Thank you. And let me say that my doctorate is not in medicine or psychiatry. It's in divinity. Okay. Why is mental health such an important topic for our community, both as Christians and as Africans? And I think it's because mental health is real. Number two, I think among most Africans, and we think that once you have a mental problem, it's over, it's incurable. No, it's curable. There are people who have had psychiatric problems, have undergone treatment, and have come out and are functioning well in society. Also in the Christian community, I think one of the big misconceptions is that all mental health is just about spiritual things. So medical science cannot help. So we need to be educated. That's what I'm saying, because I think there's so much ignorance. We pretend it's not there, it's not real, but it's real. It happens to people every day, and those who get treatment are cured. So that's what I would say. Short answer.
Thank you so much, Pastor. And since, of course, we're talking about mental health, I think it's important that we have a clear definition of what it is that we're talking about. So Dr. Olele, if you could please tell us what is mental health, give us a clinical definition of mental health, and also please distinguish between mental health and mental illness.
So mental health goes into like how healthy is your whole mindset, your whole emotions. That's what we're looking with mental health versus a mental illness where we're looking at psychiatric disorders such as major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. There's like actual pathologies with the mental illness. So in summary, mental health is more looking at your well-being, and a mental illness is a psychiatric condition.
Thank you. And also you mentioned an interesting word there. You mentioned psychiatric. You said it's a psychiatric condition. And I think oftentimes people kind of mistake mental illness, or they associate it with being quote unquote crazy. So could you please talk about, the importance of language surrounding mental health and how that influences our perceptions?
Yeah, exactly. We have to be very sensitive with that word crazy, because when we say, oh, that person is crazy, but they're not, the person is ill. It's like we wouldn't say somebody that has like diabetes is weak or has hypertension is weak. So we got to be very careful about that. Crazy could be, oh yeah, that song is crazy, or whatever adjective you want to get to it. But for a human being saying that somebody is, like, for example, struggling with schizophrenia or psychotic disorder where they're having hallucinations or paranoid delusions, I prefer not to use that word crazy to describe patients. We don't write that this person's crazy. We'll just say that this person is struggling with hallucinations, paranoia, or having disorganized speech, whatnot. So that's where I would differentiate with that.
Great, thank you so much. And also talking about, of course, language and perception. A lot of people refuse to seek help for mental illness, those who may be struggling with mental illness, because there's a lot of stigma associated with it. So, Mrs. Aishun, could you please talk to us about some of the dangers of not seeking help and suffering in silence?
Abna, thank you for the question. So basically, it's quite unfortunate that when we talk about mental health or mental illness, people frown upon it, our society frown upon it, but we should think about it as any other illness. Let's say you have a wound on your leg or you have a wound on your arm. You can visibly see the wound, you can see how it looks, how wide it is, but mental illness is just like that. It's just that you don't see the insides of somebody's brain the first time you see them. Or if you tell me your stomach hurts or you have a headache, why am I going to accept that and not accept that you have something going on with your mental health? So basically, the mental health should be seen as part of our overall health and our well-being. When mental health issues goes undiagnosed or untreated, it could actually affect your physical health as well. It could affect your cardiovascular health. It can lead to heart diseases. It can affect your immune system. You can be prone to other illnesses, such as we're in a pandemic now, so we all know what's going on. It can even affect your digestive system and cause different kinds of illnesses with your digestive system. And eventually it can lead to death through even suicide, when people begin to have suicidal ideations and even go as far as having a plan for it and actually attempting and being successful and killing themselves. So that's why it's very important that we pay attention to mental health in our society. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's great that you mentioned talking about how there are some things that are often overlooked when it comes to mental health. And so I'd like to direct my next question to Dr. Sackey. Can you just talk to us about some of the factors that are often overlooked in mental health, or contributing factors with mental health?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And again, thank you for having me. So when we talk about mental health, and everyone on the panel essentially has alluded to it, and that we shouldn't just look at it in an isolated form, and that it's just, someone is dealing with something emotionally and they're not struggling to deal with it. You have to understand that mental health is part of the system, our whole body. I always like to describe to my patients that when I'm treating your mind, I approach it holistically, meaning that it's your whole body. And there are so many systems that affect one another. And so when we talk about factors that can keep our minds healthy, as Dr. Olele said, the aspect of mental health is the health of our mind. And there's so many different things that we can do on a daily basis, and even different markers that we can look for when it comes to whether our minds are in a healthy place or not. A lot of the basic needs, quote unquote, that our body requires to include sleep, healthy diet, exercise, those three things right there are key. And we're talking about scientifically, they recommend at least 7 hours for the age group that I would see here, at least 7.5 hours of sleep at night. You want to get at least 3 to 5 days of exercise during a week, at least 30 minutes, get the cardio, get your heart working. And just to even highlight quickly on why exercise is important, when you exercise, you're forcing blood to circulate through your body, including your brain. And as you circulate more blood to your brain, you're giving your brain more oxygen, which is our fuel. When you give your brain more oxygen, you're allowing your brain to function at the highest capacity, function at its ability, and do the things that it needs to do, including creating the chemicals that it needs to create in order for us to live a healthy, functional life. So that's just exercise by itself. We also, again, the food that you eat, you are what you eat. Some of the diet, some of the food choices we choose, it affects our stomach, which automatically affects the way that our stomach communicates with our brain. And that goes into, again, the health of our minds. So you can see that just what you eat, how you sleep, how much you exercise plays just a fundamental role in the health of your mind. But there's going to be a bunch of other stuff that I'm sure we're going to touch on that we can all take home and try to do on a daily basis to keep us in the best place possible.
Dr. Olele, you let me preface this. So some of you may have seen the initials behind Dr. Olele's name, DO, meaning he's a doctor of osteopathic medicine. And so Dr. Olele, in your approach to mental health, you take this kind of like Dr. Sackey touched on, this holistic approach or a whole person approach to mental health and medicine. So can you maybe add a little bit to what Dr. Sackey said about mental health and this connection of mind, body, and spirit, and especially if you could elaborate on how the spirit also plays a role in mental health?
Yeah, that triad is very important, that mind, body, spirit, because as Dr. Sackey alluded, there's that connection. And to me, the brain is the most powerful organ in the body, because the brain it runs, it's like the computer of your body, it runs everything. And so it has your personality and your functions, whatnot. And so in that, you're encompassing your body, your physical nature, and then your spiritual nature, because that's very important. And I'm glad we're talking about this in this faith community about this spirit, because that's very important, because we're all led by the spirit, and our spirit allows us to have our faith. And when we're down, we're always looking for God for guidance. But a lot of us, we all do struggle with feeling sad, feeling anxious, having fear. All these are natural feelings. But when it becomes affecting your mental health, it's when it starts impairing your function, such as work, your social functioning, your personal functioning, where for example, let's say you're depressed. You may be sleeping too much or sleeping less. So that affects your physical health. And then you have, like in depression, you lose interest in activities. So you may lose interest in going to church or studying the word. So then that affects your spirit. And you may have, and one of the symptoms of depression and anxiety is fatigue as well. So a person may not have energy to do the normal activities, such as Dr. Sackey was talking about exercising 3 to 4 times a week. If you don't have the energy or you feel fatigued, you're not going to do that. So now you guys see where the correlation of that mind, body, spirit, everything's affected, where if one part of it goes down, another could go down. So yeah, this is a great topic, especially talking about the mind, body, spirit, and I'm glad you brought that up.
And thank you for elaborating. Mrs. Aishan, you have a really good analogy for talking about trauma. And I'm talking about trauma now because there are a number of mental health issues that can arise from trauma. So could you please talk about trauma and its effect on the body?
Okay, thank you again. So we earlier on mentioned, I think Dr. Olele earlier on mentioned that, life in general comes with a whole lot of issues. Life comes with gains, it comes with losses, it comes with, people often say life hits you. So when something happens, and our bodies are made to always be in equilibrium. So at every point, what your body is lacking, your body tries to make up for it. So when trauma happens, it's almost like an analogy I can use because of my teaching background is it's like having a swing set. So when the swing set is not moved, it's quite stable and in equilibrium. But when trauma occurs, like you have a loss of a loved one, you lose a relationship, you fail at something, you lose money, things like that. The brain sees it as a shock, or a shock happens, and then it drives it, the equilibrium of the brain or of the whole human system is thrown off. So it happens to swing you back and forth. One day you're happy, one day you're sad, and your mood keeps switching back and forth. But remember the body is trying to achieve equilibrium. The chemicals in your brains are trying to stabilize to be able to cope, because naturally we've been created to be able to cope. We have coping mechanisms, but we realize that, let's say, for example, Dr. Olele talked about depression, for example, affecting your mood, your sleep, how you relate to other people. So if you notice that those you are not balancing over a period of about extended periods, 2 weeks, 14 days onwards, it's very important to talk to your healthcare professional, because when you seek care early, there could be interventions for you. So talk to somebody, talk to a healthcare professional around you, talk to your pastor, talk to a nurse, talk to somebody. And also when you have your annual visits with your doctor too, it's important that you mention your health. When they are checking your heart, your blood, everything else, also talk about your mood, because life happens. We are in a pandemic right now, and you might have lost a job, people are staying home, the kids might have been home for an extended period of time. That could be stressful on people. So it's important to always talk about these things so that you can have treatments, remedies, and solutions sooner than later. Thank you.
That's it. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I wanted to add to that because what our wonderful nurse here is saying is so important. And even to what you mentioned earlier, Annie, regarding the way your body responds to mental distress. I just actually earlier this week, I had a patient who dealing with PTSD. For those who don't know, that's post-traumatic stress disorder. They said for the last 3 months, they've been losing, like having big memory lapse. So around 40-year-old female. So she thinks that she's developing Alzheimer's or some level of dementia, because she says, she'll drive somewhere and almost completely forgot how she got to the place that she ended up at. Her friends would tell her that she was doing something that she doesn't remember doing. She doesn't drink. She's kind of like, why am I blacking out? So there's actually, just to give you a real example of what happens with trauma in your body and your mind and your physical response, there's actually, in severe cases of trauma, there's what is known as dissociative reactions. That's when your brain just completely disconnects from reality. And it gets so bad that essentially your brain almost blanks out certain parts of your day. Your short-term memory is starting to blank out because it's constantly in survival mode. When you go through high trauma and there was either a life-threatening event or something in which your life was in danger or somewhere very close, or you kept seeing over and over again, your brain switches from a state of relax to high alert at all times. So it's constantly on a fight or flight. And then the third phase is freeze, which is essentially disconnect. So that's actually a sign for an individual who may be dealing with trauma for a long time, and they essentially avoided trying to manage it, trying to suppress it. It gets to a point where physically your brain detaches from reality, and you start to have these memory lapse here and there. So it's just a very, very real example of how when our mind is not operating at best ability, we actually start to see physical manifestations of these things.
I thank you both for elaborating on that. And Mr. Deshaun, with your response, you also brought up the importance of talking to somebody about it. So Dr. Olele, when would you say is a good time to see when is a good time to see somebody? And even with that, if you could also talk about maybe when is a good time to maybe, I guess, if you find a provider that's a therapist, psychiatrist, when might be a good time to let them go if you feel like maybe they're not a good fit for you? Like how does that work? What should that look like?
So in general, like when's a good time to see a mental health provider? It's when you've tried the natural lifestyle modifications, you've tried the exercising, you're venting to your friends or whatnot, and things are just not clicking. That's when I would say go talk to a mental health provider. And you could even talk to when you're seeing your general doctor, your primary care provider. You mentioned that you're having these issues with the mood and you're struggling, and then they could give you a referral. So I think that's when is the best time to see a mental health provider. Then when And I look at seeing a provider or anything is like kind of like dating. You're trying to find a right match. And it does take a while for when you're trying to develop that physician, patient, or therapist client relationship. It takes time to see if the provider is meeting your needs, understanding your concerns. So there's a lot of different aspects of it. So one important thing is to see if the provider is culturally competent. So like with this church, or knowing, for example, knowing that you're a person of faith, whatnot. So that's very important to you. So seeing if a provider is able to understand that and how that operates in your life, or we're at this African community, like certain things of either you're a first gen or somebody that just came into the US. So that's another factor that somebody may be struggling with their mental health, that societal factor. And so having a provider who could relate and understand where you're coming from and not make judgments or make biases, because we can have our own biases as well. But it's just more somebody that could connect with you and help you with the treatment plan and understands you, and you're able to understand them. So you could follow along with the treatment plan of what's going on. And I think you asked when is the appropriate time to leave?
Yeah, so maybe if somebody finds that they're in a situation where maybe they're, you talked about like, what you described as kind of like dating or finding the right match. So if people maybe don't feel like their provider is the right match for them.
Okay, yeah, and if you don't feel the provider is the right match for you, you could look for another provider or even ask for a referral from the actual provider, or go back to the original referral source and look for that. Or if not, go on your own. There's definitely Psychology Today is a great website that has all the most of mental health professionals who do sign up on that. So at the end of the day, it's about your mental health and what you want to get out of it.
Thank you so much. And of course, we have some healthcare providers on here, so maybe there might be a little bit of bias, quote unquote, in a sense that, of course, they're going to also advocate for seeing someone. But Pastor George, could you kind of talk to us about? Well, I'll say there's kind of this movement of, I would say, like Jesus and therapy, and some people may feel like, if you believe in God, or if you're a believer, if you're a Christian, you can't have mental health issues. Or maybe it's because you don't pray enough, or you don't read your Bible enough, and things like that. So is it okay for us to see a provider too, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm glad the medical professionals talked about the fact that treatment is holistic. They try to link the body, soul, and spirit. And I have gone to places where doctors have sat down with me, psychiatrists, a psychologist, social worker, and me as a pastor to talk about what to do for a patient. But I think for us who are in ministry, that is the problem. I think is more from us, in that we refuse to collaborate with healthcare professionals. And when you go to the book of Exodus, chapter 36, Moses was a man whom God called. He saw God in a burning bush. He used to go to the mountain to meet God. At some point, God said, Moses, build me a temple or a tabernacle. But what did God do? In Exodus 36, God gives him who could build, architects, artisans, who could, because Moses couldn't do it. He was not skilled. He was a shepherd by profession, so he could not do it. So it's very important that we collaborate with other professionals. For example, when my car breaks down, I go take it to a mechanic. I don't lay hands on it. I don't preach to the car. I can't read scriptures to the car. It's very important we understand that. I took a course in biblical counseling. One of the first things I learned, or one of the most important lessons I learned, was to know where my competence is, so that at some point I can hand over to somebody who is a professional to take over from there. And I think if we as pastors or as Christians understand that pastors cannot do everything, we are human. So at some point, you need to go see somebody else. If some of you come to me and you have COVID, I'm going to ask you to call 911. I'm not going to come lay hands on you because I don't want to catch it. And that is reality. Sickness is there. Both believers and unbelievers have sicknesses. In fact, the mother of Peter had a fever. The Bible says Jesus touched her and she was healed. If it were today, I would ask her to take Tylenol or Advil. So unfortunately, the stigma we are attached with as Africans and as Christians and spiritualizing it, we refuse to seek help. but you can't help it. That is what they are trained in. As a pastor, I'm not trained in psychiatry. I'm not trained in mental health. I know the Bible. I am not trained in other physical illnesses. That is why I tell you to go see your doctor. For example, let me show you. If this is all I say before I end it, I just want to say, let me do a little bit of show and tell. I have here in my hand a medicine bottle. It contains Zocor, and I've been taking it for about 20 years because the doctors told me my cholesterol is high. I tried that, it wasn't working. So they said my liver produces too much cholesterol. It's a chemical issue. So I take this to control it. And I've been taking it for 20 years. So don't think that if your brain, and one thing I learned too, the doctors can correct me, is that a lot of mental issues or mental diseases is around chemicals in the brain, which are not working right. So mine is in the liver, yours is in the brain. So if I'm taking this, why wouldn't you take the one that you need also to help you with your brain? You know, talk about pressure. Some time ago, my father, before he died, he was blind. My mother was blind in one. I have an older brother who's lost 60% of his vision. I told my doctor, they checked my eye pressure. My eye pressure was way up. I'm a pastor. I use these eyes to read the Bible every day. I preach. I believe in healing. So they told me to take this medication. Every morning, I drop one in every eye. By the grace of God, because of that, my nerves, every time they check my eye nerves, they are fine. So which means what happened to my father is not going to happen to me. So God is the one, just like how he had artisans help Moses. These doctors, these nurses, these psychologists, these therapists, they are like the artisans. We preach the word of God to you, but then it gets to a point where you need an artisan to work with you, a mechanic to work on your car. When we're building the church building, yes, I'm a man of God, but there's no way I can build. The building will fall on us. I need architects, I need engineers to design the structural things. So the same way, you can't say that you're not going to get medical help. That's what I would say to that. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you did. And Dr. Sackey, did you unmute? Did you want to say something or add to that? Or?
Oh, no. I want to just commend Pastor for that beautiful analogy, and to also just add to what he said. It is true. There's a physical reaction, physical changes in our brain that determines how our emotional response are, how our mood changes can be, and so forth. So just like how the example I always use for my patients is that, you know, if you have a broken leg, right, you're not going to try to just walk on it. You're not going to just ask the pastor to pray over the broken leg and let it heal. You have to do the work to heal it. And that's what mental health is. In a sense, there's some level of an injury, or there is changes in the way that our brain is operating. And I'll tell you this, majority of the time, your brain is trying to adapt to whatever environment or whatever trauma or whatever effect, either genetically, that may have happened. And that causes you to go about and perceive things in different ways and react in different ways. And so oftentimes you'll find that treatment, whether it's therapy, whether it's, you know, doing all the things holistically, sleeping right, those things help to better regulate the way our chemicals are communicating with each other in our brain so that we can kind of go back to normalcy. So the same thing, if your leg is broken, you can't just say, I'm gonna walk on it, or I'm just gonna let it go and it'll heal itself. You get surgery, do rehab, do the things you need to do, continue to pray at the same time. As you're praying, asking God for his favor and having faith that he will heal you, and continue to do the things that you need to do in order to get better. So that's that kind. I love what Pastor said, and I just wanted to reemphasize that as well.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to stick with you for a little bit, because of course, Pastor showed us that medication bottle. And of course, as a psychopharmacologist, you don't just prescribe medication, you also manage it. So can you kind of talk about, of course, we talked about the importance of getting help talking to a provider, but when does what role does medication play? Like when does that come into play? And also, if you want to talk about some of the myths or misconceptions around medication, because some people may be hesitant as well to get medication.
Yeah, great question. I'll start by saying I myself was hesitant about medications before I learned about them. It's scary, right? You're thinking about putting something foreign in your body and hoping that it goes and does the right thing in the right place, and that it doesn't change who you are. It's like once it goes in, you can't take it out. And so what the key thing about medications is that, even though my role, and I always say this in my clinic, my role is a medication management provider, but I find myself actually, whenever I get patients as consults, I find myself removing a lot more medications than adding on, because we have to be able to first understand the concept that our bodies, God has built our bodies to be able to defend and heal itself to some degree. There comes to a point where your body can no longer heal itself on its own, and that's where you need assistance. But the first thing I check for is, what are you doing in your day-to-day lives? What are some coping mechanisms? Are you trying to cure your anxiety with alcohol? Because if that's the case, unless we get that managed, medications to some degree aren't even going to be as effective. So it's like, you look at all these other factors. Are you doing therapy? Have you tried therapy? What situations are you living with? There's also things to consider, because I used to say when I first started practicing, medications always last line. There are certain cases where medications needs to start earlier than later because of the severity of their symptoms. Certain conditions whereby, for what we have now, medication seems to be at least a gateway to start the healing process. So what I implore everyone to do, first of all, is make sure you're gaining the knowledge from your providers. Actually force your providers to give you all the information necessary about your care, including what the medication is and what it can do. And having that knowledge and that trust that you build from your provider, you may start to feel a little bit more comfortable as to whether, if I'm starting this medication, I can lead to eventually a place that I need to get to mentally. Now, not all medications are perfect. In fact, nothing on this earth, whether it's plants, natural products, they're not perfect. A lot of things just have side effects. Like I know a few patients who say, I only stick with plants and herbs. Like, well, you won't go out there and eat poison ivy and expect nothing to happen. That's going to have side effects too. So it's all about a provider, in my case, being able to educate you, provide you the expectations of what it is and what may or may not happen. So kind of to go into some of the misconceptions, the main ones that I always hear is that, and if you were to focus on depression and anxiety, and even PTSD, those are very common conditions in America and in the world in general. When we talk about antidepressants, people have a fear that it may change who they are or turn them into a zombie or have kind of a loose control of who they are. That's not the intentions of medications. And in fact, if you take a medication and you lose, there's some sense of disconnection from your reality or yourself, then that means something's wrong. You should go and talk to your provider to see what's going on. The medication is more so helping to regulate your reaction to stress. That's really the main thing. You don't take these medications and expect to be just super happy, walking around like, okay, I'm happy, you get slapped and you're happy. That's not how it works. It's more so you're able to process the stressors from your day-to-day. I always say there's no medication yet out there to get rid of, bad situations. Bad situations will always come. Just like in prayer and in faith, you're in this world, and you need to continue to pray and stay with it connected to Christ in order to navigate this world safely. But you can't stop certain people from doing certain things. This is just how the world is. And so medications, in a sense, is helping you to better navigate the stressors that you're dealing with. And then as long as you're doing the things you need to do on your end, you're better able to handle those things. You also, one other myth that I'll just throw out there before I pass it back, people often say, I don't want my liver or my kidneys to be damaged. That's, when you look at the broad spectrum of medications, majority of them aren't causing damage to your liver or your kidney. Now, if your liver or your kidney is damaged, you need to get that looked at before you start certain medications, because you may have to adjust how much you take. But just by taking medications daily doesn't automatically mean you're damaging your liver or your kidneys. And we always think about the fact that I have a few patients who they feel more comfortable drinking every day to solve their problems versus taking a medication. I'm like, well, if you look at the damage between alcohol and, say, Zoloft, there's a drastic difference. Alcohol is the reason why they no longer, this is a long time ago, they no longer even consider it to have any medical benefit because it's causing direct damage to you. So if you're concerned about this medication causes liver damage, if you're drinking every day, then clearly there's some misconception and confusion. So a lot of it is talking to your provider, understanding uniquely what conditions you may have or what you're presenting with and how they can provide you the best therapy possible, and having confidence in that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sackey.
Mhm.
And just a note, we'll be moving to audience Q&A in a little bit. So please, everyone, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But in the meantime, I did want to ask a question to Mrs. Aishan. As Dr. Sackey was talking, he was talking about how, maybe people may resort to other means or in terms of their mental health issues, maybe if that's alcohol or whatever the case is. But I think with that, something that came to mind was like having an outlet, right? Having a healthy outlet. So can you talk about like what the importance of having a healthy outlet, especially in times like this and COVID, people are very isolated and things like that. And maybe if you want to offer some ways that you think are healthy ways to have an outlet.
Okay, great. Great question. So just one more thing I wanted to add to what Dr. Sackey said. I also want people to know that when you're taking these medicines, the doctors keep monitoring you, and they also make sure that you're getting the most benefit out of your medicines. And once you start doing better, sometimes the doctors can even taper you off certain medicines and even reduce the doses that you take. Also, I also wanted to add that most of these medicines do not, oftentimes people say, oh, I've taken the medicine for the whole week and I don't feel any difference. I also wanted to mention that sometimes it can take up to even a month or two for you to be able to actually feel the improvement coming on. So that's one thing I also wanted to add. Okay, so back to your questions, Abna. I want to also let us know that it's always important that we have our loved ones around us talk about how we're feeling. Oftentimes, when people ask us, well, I'm not talking about just by the roadside, how are you doing? I'm fine. But if your dad or your mom, you live with your parents and your dad or mom is asking you, how are you doing? How are you really doing? They come to your room, they sit on your bed and check on you. It's always great to tell them, oh, Dad, I'm not happy today, or I'm not feeling like myself. That's what a lot of people tell me, that I don't feel like myself. So when people are saying that I don't feel like myself, we should be able to ask different follow-up questions to get to know what they mean by they do not feel like themselves. Like you said, Dr. Sackey said, sometimes with the brain, sometimes you can even have memory loss, which can result in like people leaving their stove on. They can even leave the gas on in the house. People can drive out and even forget that their garages are still open. Things like that. You go to the gas station, you pump the gas, and you can even forget to close the little gas door, the little thing. And a whole lot. People even forget their children in the cars and can result in the death of the child. So when you start realizing some of these changes, talk to somebody about it. Call your doctor, leave a message, do something about it. And, that's with the loved ones and our friends. We should be talking about how we're feeling. And, with this pandemic, most of us realize that we are just caged up in the house and working from home, school from home, everything from home. Some of the things that you could be doing is, my friends and I did was the drive-by date. So we go by drive-through, get the food. You sit in your car at the parking lot. I sit in my car at the parking lot, and we talk through the window while we're eating the food, while keeping social distancing and still talking. Because when you're not used to being isolated and things like that happen, because now the depression rates are going up, suicidal rates are going up in people of all ages. I know that there's FaceTime and all that, but in order for you to protect yourself, device means FaceTime, video calls, conferences like these, things like that, church meetings, try to get involved in every way possible so that you're not isolated. the church has a lot of programs that you can join, even on the weekends. Join some of these programs. Just talk your heart out, and at the end of the day, you feel much better and you go to bed. So I just want us to be more flexible and, devise different means of just talking about how we are feeling, having a laugh here or there, and just keeping a lighter mood. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we also have a couple of questions coming in the chat. So I'm gonna transition to asking those questions, and then maybe I'll sprinkle in some more of my own. So the first question, I will direct this one to Dr. Sackey. Someone asked, do any of these medications eventually solve your problem, or do they just manage it?
A great question. I think what it comes down to is understanding or identifying what is the perspective of the problem. Like I said, and I think everyone else would agree here, that mental health is a byproduct of so many different things. In the same way, treatment is composed of so many different things. It's dynamic. It's not just taking a medication and then you're feeling better. It's also not just simply sleeping right and eating right and you feel better, depending on the condition. So the first thing you have to identify is, what is the reality? Where are you trying to get to? What is the goal of your mental health? And it can vary from condition to condition, from person to person, from situation to situation. Ultimately, medications, I like to view them more so as an assistance in moments where your body is unable to solve it on its own. Where when you do all these things, when you're doing therapy, you're living a healthy lifestyle, you're spiritually connected, and you're still experiencing problems, it helps to shift the way that these chemicals are being released so that you can gain some better clarity. But that may be just what you need to kind of get on track with everything. I believe it was Dr. Olele or a nurse Stanley saying how exercise is important for our mental health, but sometimes when you're dealing with deep depression, you don't even have the desire to get up and exercise. So sometimes that medication helps to get you over that hump where, even family support, going to church every day, counseling hasn't helped, but perhaps getting something to start to shift the chemicals that have been disoriented can start to shift that, and then you can get going, and then all these other pillars will start to fall in line. In fact, when we look at even for individuals who may have resorted to alcohol, again, to solve problems, and this is a judgment-free zone. I'm referring to the moments where people feel as if, a person may feel like, the only way I can solve this problem and to numb myself is my drinking excess amount of alcohol. So that's what we call negative coping mechanisms. And so when you get to that point, sometimes just talking to the person, asking them to exercise, eat right, may not solve that problem at the stage that it is at that point. Sometimes medications do help in that case to help reduce the cravings for the alcohol. Then it can kind of get back on track and then start solving some of these other problems. So think of it as more so as an assistance. And honestly, when we look at mental health, never avoid trying to think of one particular therapy intervention as the one-stop shop to fix it all. These are all different things that we can try and do to get to ultimately a better place. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to also piggyback on that. When I do treat my patients with medications, I discuss everything. I even ask about family history of mental illness and I even ask my patients, have your family members taken any certain medications? And I like to hear about that because there's also a genetic component that we also want to talk about, how your genes, your body interacts with certain drugs. So that's why I love to investigate about family history of what family members had successes on certain medications and what were failures. So that could clue me in a little bit about how a patient may potentially respond to a certain medication based off of genetics. But then a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I failed a medication so many times or whatnot, and it caused me side effects or adverse effects. I felt nauseous or I felt too sedated or tired. It's because with our genes, it depends how our body breaks down the medication. And all our bodies are, God has formed us uniquely. We're all unique. And so when your body, what we call metabolizes, some people break down medication very slowly. And so they have too much of it in there and it could be very toxic for them. And that's where they get some of these adverse effects. And others where they break down the medication too fast and they don't feel it. And so that's why the doctors sometimes may have to increase the strength of a medication to see if that might help a person. And then also too, all medications can interact with each other. So we also have to look for, as the providers, we also look for drug-drug interactions, because there's some medications that you can take that can increase the effect of another medication and vice versa, bring down the effect of medication. So there's a lot of factors, environmental factors, like if you're drinking alcohol, that could affect your medication. Taking, consuming any type of substance, that could affect your medication management as well. So there's a lot of environmental factors that could affect a person in medication. And I know the person was asking if that's the end all be all. I look at the medication as, like Dr. Sackey said, as an assistant. Like if somebody was asthmatic, their inhaler is they need their inhaler. So I look at the medication as something that can just part of your life. It's not who you are. So if you have to take a Zoloft or you have to take an Abilify, whatever medication you have to take to function for work, whatever you need to do, take it because it's helpful. But if you notice that the medication, you're experiencing side effects, like when you take a medication, you're falling asleep in class or school, this is the time to talk to the doctor. And the doctor may say, okay, you're taking it during the daytime, so maybe let's switch it to nighttime. So that way you'll take it for sleep. So these are conversations you should have with your doctor, with your psychiatrist. And these are conversations I do have. And I'm about lifestyle, being holistic. I always try to match a certain type of medication to the lifestyle that my patient wants. So, and this is important to talk about, if a medication will cause weight gain, if it will increase cholesterol, if it will, like somebody taking ADHD medications, stimulants, we'll talk about there's cardiovascular risk, like it could increase your blood pressure, your heart rate. So these are different factors. And I try to just see the person as a whole and seeing what medications we could choose. And then also we look at the history is very important.
If I can make, this is really good. I do want to just add one more thing that I think is critically important to that Dr. Olele mentioned. We really do have to be careful about looking online, looking at what somebody else's experiences is, and then assuming that will be our experience. We have to understand that literally our bodies are different. Like Dr. Olele said, our genetics are different. Even whoever may have wrote their reaction to it, whether they said that it really worked or it didn't work at all, or they had a bad reaction, we don't know what else they were doing. We don't know how they took the medication. We don't know if, they were taking every other month, or if they were drinking excessively, or they were, smoking on top of that. We don't know. And so I encourage anyone who's on medications to, be informed, but at the same time, use us as the resources. We're here to help you out, and we're here to clear up any misconceptions, because unfortunately, not everyone's experience is going to be the same. And at the same time, that first medication may not be the solution or the one that may be the best fit for you. Sometimes it's trial and error, and just kind of being patient with that process is very important.
Thank you both. The next question, I think I'll direct this one to Dr. Olele. Someone asked, what are ways you can be a better friend to someone who is depressed or has severe anxiety? Yeah.
Okay, this is a great question. One of the first things I'll say is being available and present. So that's one of the best things. Sometimes you don't have to talk, just being there and that your presence is can be enough. Being there, because somebody, I'm glad about this topic. Somebody with depression, they don't have energy to do things. They may not have energy to brush their teeth, take a shower, or even go prepare a meal. So as a friend, the one coming over, bringing over Chick-fil-A for your friend to eat, or you're saying, hey, get up. Let me go to the shower. I'll run the shower for you, just to help you out. So these are little things that a friend could do, or saying, hey, I noticed that you've been home all day. let's go out, let me take you outside, let's go let's get some air, whatnot, or let me take you to your favorite restaurant, whatnot. And during COVID, this dampened a lot of people because of the limited interaction. But like being a support system for your friend is very important. And especially, let's flip over to anxiety now. This is very important because there are a lot of people that do struggle with social anxiety or generalized anxiety. They're worrying a lot. They want to avoid people. So as a friend, I mean, if you're not a mental health provider, you may have just a layman's understanding of what's going on with anxiety, but your friend their thoughts are attacking them, like, and their fear of judgments, their fear of, they're having what we call intrusive thoughts. So these thoughts are bothering them. It's impairing their life. So as a friend, sometimes you may joke them and say, "Oh, that's not really gonna happen," but you could talk them down, like saying, "Okay, you fear that X, Y, and Z is gonna happen," but you could bring facts and say, "This may not happen because of this," and then it brings them back to reality. So I think that's very important, is to be that support system, be somebody who they could talk to. But here's another flip side. At the end of the day, your friends are there to support you, but your friends do not replace a therapist or mental health provider, because they don't have the science or the trainings to help navigate through a person, because they could be venting a lot. And as a friend may sometimes, that may be a lot for them and may be triggering. So there's also, as a friend, the best advice too, sometimes when they're venting and telling you, is, "Hey, I love you, I want to support you, but we also should look into getting you to a mental health provider. And if you're scared to go by there, I will go with you. I'll be in the waiting room." And I've had some instances where some of the patients invited their friends to join the session. I'm like, "Are you cool with that?" And they're like, "Yeah, I want this person to be here." So just even taking your friend there to go to the appointment, that is like awesome. So just know, as a friend, what is your breaking point or whatnot, so that way you're not eventually start to dodge your friend because you can't take too much of what they're telling you. So just being aware of your circumstances and what's triggering you as well, but just letting that person know that you love them and you're there for them, that's true friendship. And right there.
That was really, really good in terms of talking about how we can support people. The next question, someone said they have a terrible fear of heights. Does that have anything to do with their psyche? I'll let you all decide who wants to.
That could be
That
could be a phobia. So pretty much may have had this phobia since they were being fear of heights. So I've had patients who are scared of being on planes, scared of going on bridges, which are very high. So here they would probably go to therapy, talk to the therapist, understand the root cause of that fear of heights. Was there something that happened? Is this something that may be and learned from behavior from the family? Because so you may learn this, but then it comes to the point where the therapist has tried all the techniques, then they may refer them to a psychiatrist who may prescribe a medication after evaluating everything to help this person deal with their fear. So I've had patients that have had this experience and we talked about it. I've tried medications, they tried therapy, and they got out of it. And eventually they came off the medication and they feel like they have their life back, and they don't feel like the height is their monster. They don't put that height on the pedestal, because now they're able to go to the height and do well. So it can be a problem, but it doesn't define you. So that's one I want you to know about. It doesn't define you.
I kind of want to add to that as well. I think this kind of almost goes into that next question too. We have to understand that there's a predictable or I don't like to say normal, but there's an expected amount of fear in our day-to-day lives. And then there's when it's pathological, like Dr. Olele said, and that just simply means it gets to a point where it affects your day-to-day basis. So if we're using an example of height, right? One may have, like, say if you're thinking about skydiving, like, okay, I'm not gonna skydive because that's predictably, I think it's understandable to be a bit nervous about that. Now, if we're talking about a fear of heights where you can ride airplanes, this is affecting your day-to-day. This is a functional activity in which you should start to identify, okay, I need to seek help for this. And that is part of a lot of what mental health is. There's a certain degree, there's a point where in which you have to understand that, hey, though I can be afraid of X, Y, and Z, if it's impairing my functionality, my day-to-day, if I have to circumvent my life in order to compensate for this, then that means I need to get with that. And so there is a lot of times, over time, whenever you have this suppression of this anxiety or even depression or any other mental health condition, your body and your brain starts to adjust to this new norm. It's almost like in PTSD, we call it avoidance. You're developing different strategies to avoid dealing with this fear. And so again, your life, your daily function is disrupted. And so chemically, we see changes mainly when we talk about anxiety. I mentioned before, fight or flight. And that's the flip in your switch in your body's system, where you start to treat everything as if there is some sort of threat around. So you're more on alert. You're in a higher sense of alert. And so when we talk about like panic attacks, you might feel like your heart is racing. You might feel like you're breathing faster, harder. Your chest is beating fast. You might feel warmer. So that whole state of being is what we call the sympathetic nervous system. That's what your body does whenever you say, if you see a bear coming at you, you have to do something to evade it or to survive. And so in high anxiety, a lot of times they're experiencing high levels of adrenaline. They're constantly at states, or they're easily tipped over to that state. So you're seeing these changes and just imagine that you're running from a bear almost all the time, or you're at a state when something happens that, say, if I'm not dealing with anxiety, I may be able to handle like socially, but if somebody who has social anxiety, that being in a social environment feels like they're in front of a bear. And so there is your body's response to try to evade or survive that event. So if we were to look at anxiety in that way, it kind of describes to you how much shift, how severe it presents in that individual who's suffering from that condition.
Okay. We had another question, and I think I'd like to direct this one to Mrs. Aishan. Someone asked, can you explain medically what someone with anxiety is experiencing?
Okay, thanks. I think Dr. Sackey has said most of it, like having a bear in front of you or being attacked, how you feel. There's a heightened sense of fear or nervousness and being restless. And there's a feeling of having a sense of like an impending doom, almost as if it's like, it's a terrible feeling to have. It's almost like the scariest thing or the most absurd thing happening to you, but you standing on the other side do not see anything happening. That is why it's important to believe people when they tell you they are going through these things. It can even show off as physical symptoms like a faster heart rate. The person can hyperventilate, like breathe very, very rapidly. You can even see them trembling, and they can have trouble concentrating or doing anything. Sometimes people can even pace up and down. Sometimes you see that people pacing up and down, holding their ears like something is happening, but you don't see anything around them, but that's how they're feeling. So it's a very difficult time when people go through this. So it's always important to be compassionate and to be gentle and listen. Like we said earlier, Dr. Olele said, be present. And if you think it's, these things can sometimes overwhelm the ordinary person. So if it's really getting to you, you should be able to introduce a healthcare professional. Like you said, go with the person to the doctor, give the person a ride, because I don't think such a person will be able to drive to see the doctor. And if it's serious, call 911 for the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Aishan. This next one is for Pastor. this is kind of a long question, but I'll just read it as it is. The question is, what will be the advice to those who are so obsessed with pastors and prophets so much that when they are sick, instead of going to the hospital, they would rather go to the pastor or prophet?
Let me unmute myself. That's why I try to explain that life, there are different people who specialize in different things. Even as pastors, there are some pastors who are good teachers, who are good counselors. Some are good preachers, some are good evangelists. We even have specialties. And in life, I think you need to know where your limitations are. If you think you can do everything, you have a problem. Like the example I gave about a car. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to explain this to Christians, that God gave all of these professions to us as gifts. So let's use them. It's not just us. If you need a church, we have the fivefold ministries, you know. So as a pastor, I don't go out doing an evangelist job. So why do I want to do a doctor's job? I remember one time I went to a hospital to see someone who was sick, not psychiatric issue, but he had some rashes all over them. The doctors couldn't diagnose it. We prayed with him. When I was going out, somebody met me and said, oh, actually, the wife told me that a prophet came there earlier and said this disease is spiritual, so he should be discharged, he should go home. And my answer is this: can't God's power work in the hospital? I don't discharge patients. You don't let the doctor say, look, I've come to the end of my hope, I'm discharging him. I will pray for you. And I tell people this all the time. When they are sick and they call me, I say, look, let the doctors do their job. I will pray for you. I remember one sister came to give a testimony in church. When she discovered she had breast cancer, she was so down, she was crying. I went to the home, I prayed with the family. But I told her one thing: I'm going to pray, that's my job, but let the doctors do their job. Okay, whatever they tell you, do it. And she said that is what saved her life. So I think it's the pastors tend to be competitive. We want a name, we want to be popular. I healed this person, I did this miracle, and so on. But think about it. When you have a pharmacist or a doctor or a nurse or even a mechanic, they are trained in a certain thing, they are certified. Okay, they have taken an oath. And sometimes I tell people, trust your doctor more than you trust me when it comes to your health, because I know zilch. Okay, one time I was going to have surgery. And when the doctor came in, he said, before I go in, do you mind if I pray with you? I said, sure, I'm a pastor. He said, then you pray. I said, no, in this context, I am the patient, you are the doctor. So you pray for me. So we need to understand that in every situation, there is somebody there who knows it more than you. You want me to teach you the scripture, I'll teach you, I'll pray with you, but let the doctors do their job. And it's unfortunate. And I think as African Christians, basically, I believe it's more because of our traditional religious thinking that we have brought into the church, where we think every problem has a spiritual root. In most African society, if someone dies, who killed him? So you can't die of natural causes. And then when in a society, somebody goes into a business and they become rich, everybody thinks they got some juju somewhere to help them. It can be because of business strategy. That's why they became rich. So our theology is flawed in that we brought our traditional religious thinking into the Christianity. So we need to be very careful with our theology, you know, and that's what I would say to it. So we, the believers ourselves, need to be very careful with our theology. You know, there are times people have come to me with somebody who has obviously a mental problem. And I said, and they want us to pray for the person. I said, I will not start the prayer until the person is under care. Then I know that they are making an effort for themselves. The doctor is helping them. Then we will start the prayer. I'll talk to the doctor to see what we can do as a church to help the person. And that is how we need to work. When I've been to hospitals where somebody has passed away, there's bereavement and so on. Oftentimes, I sit with the social worker because I may see this once in 2 or 3 years, but that social worker in the hospital sees this every day. And I ask them for their help, and we work together as a team to make sure that we help the person who is bereaved, you know, to get the best outcome. And it works very, very well. I want to see somebody who had lost a child, and they actually called for their pastor. So when I went there, the social worker was waiting for me. I got in there, talked to the person, prayed with the person. The person was doing fine. So the social worker tried to talk to the person. The person said, no, you can't talk to me. You know, you haven't experienced this before. I already talked to my pastor. And I said, no, she sees this every day. I see it once in a while. all of a sudden she was going through this process where she couldn't breathe, hyperventilation. I don't know what to do. The social worker said, breathe in and out, in, out. All of a sudden she felt, hey, sit down. If it was me alone, we'd be in bad shape. I don't know what to tell you to do, but that person sees it every day, so they know what to do to help you. So let's understand that this is what they are trained to do. They have gone to school many years to learn this. Let them do their job. Let your pastors do their job. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, also, Abna, I also want to just add that, you know how Pastor talked about his eyesight and his cholesterol. When you think about it, by Pastor taking his medicines and treating these hereditary conditions, he's probably breaking something that a pastor sitting somewhere calling ancestral curses, because probably the great-grandfather died from the same thing, the grandfather died of the same thing, the dad died of the same thing. But you knowing, having that knowledge, education, and being able to take your medicine and treat the condition, you are breaking those, what they are calling ancestral curses. You finding the right doctor. I remember Dr. Lily talking about how finding the right doctor is like dating. You finding the right doctor that knows you, understands your culture in this type of system is a miracle on its own. The doctor actually finding what is wrong with your health or knowing what is wrong with you, getting you the medication, making sure you're staying within therapeutic levels is another miracle on its own. So we shouldn't take for granted how God answers prayers or works through these medical professions to be able to bring a solution to some of these problems. So we have to be careful and not just, people just go lay their bed in the church and say, I'm staying there, I'm getting my healing, and not see the doctor, because to be able to get these things done, you are really doing a lot for your health. Thank you.
Thank you both, Pastor George and Mrs. Aishan. I think this is also a great segue to the next question that someone asked, because Pastor, you talked about trusting the doctors and letting them do their job. However, someone did bring up a situation here where, asking, how do you handle a situation where you don't agree with the provider on taking a medication? Because in that case, you're a doctor, would probably know more than you. But what do you do when you feel like you need more talk therapy, but your therapist thinks you need medication? How do we go about navigating that, I guess, doctor-patient relationship? Yeah, Dr. Olele or Dr. Sackey could take this one.
Yeah, I would say this. At the end of the day, when a patient, we're talking and I make a recommendation about, I feel that this medication will be good for you. I have patients that say no, they don't want to take medication. And I have to respect that. I respect that as a provider. I give my recommendations. I say why I feel that they'll benefit from medications based off my previous histories and cases and seeing this over and over again. I'll tell them, based on what I've been seeing, you're a candidate for a medication. Here's why. But here's the thing. You don't have to take the medication now. I always tell the patient, this is why I handle it. I don't want to force you to take a medication. Here's material. Take some time to read about it, talk with family members, and see whatnot. If not, get a second opinion. You can get a second opinion from another provider who will be able to see you and tell you. Because the way I look at it is, when a person's doing therapy and the therapist says, oh yeah, it's time for you need medication, that's like a big hint, because therapy, they go through certain courses, certain steps and trying to help the person. But if there's something that is preventing this person from fully engaging in therapy or clicking, that's when therapy and medication management together is very powerful. And so everybody at the end of the day has their right as a human being. The doctors, we're not enforcers. We're not gonna force the pill to you. So that's the one thing I want to break that myth. We're not gonna force a pill to you. However, unless you're a person that doesn't have your legal rights or not, or you have guardianship over you, but that's another story. But in regards, let's say you do have your rights and whatnot, everything. it's important to know you do have the right to say no, and you have the right to research, but look at all your opinions and then really see, is it because you just have a whole view of medication itself? So that's one of the questions you want to find out. Is it because of your fears, your concerns, or something your family members have talked bad about a medication? Or because a lot of times people's root cause of not wanting to take a medication is based off of, oh, this is what happened to Uncle so-and-so when they took a medication, or a friend or a family member that took a medicine. So those little fears are there. On the other hand, they just feel that they could do it naturally. And so therapy is the only solution. So the way I'm going to look at it is everybody's variable, everybody's lives are unique. So at the end of the day, hear them out, but get a second opinion.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what Dr. Olele said just there. For me, anytime that comes up, of course, I always make it clear, I'm here to help you out. If we don't need, if I don't think medication is necessary, I'm not going to recommend that. But what I do with those opportunities is, I think it like Dr. Olele mentioned, this is an opportunity to have a discussion about, what your perspective on medications is. In fact, at the beginning of all my appointments, this is the first time I'm seeing you. I ask you before I even talk about medications, what is your perspective on psychotropic medications? What is your perspective on antidepressants? Because through that conversation, you'll find a lot of that, the fears or the unknown, even the stigma behind it. Like doctor just mentioned, when you're doing therapy and then when they say, okay, I think it's time for medications, sometimes it's your fear that jumps in front of it and says, no, because you don't want to feel like you're that bad, quote unquote. But we have to understand that suggested medication doesn't automatically mean that you progress to a certain severity. There are situations where even starting with medications while therapy at the same time is helpful. I think what is important for us healthcare providers, as well as everyone has reiterated, we have to create a safe space for the people who we're treating, a safe space for them to feel comfortable. And we have to allow them to feel like they're a part of this treatment. I always say that we are making a decision, and make sure that you're catering the treatment to what their concerns are. And at the same time, being very transparent, the good and the bad. This is what may happen. This may not happen. These are the chances of this happening. This may happen as well. And so having that dialogue, and then yes, knowing that not every provider may have the right approach. Like I said, I see patients and I end up removing medications that are unnecessary. They haven't never got their thyroid checked, and the thyroid is playing a huge role in how they're feeling. And it's like, if you neglect that piece, then you may forget that without treating that, these medications are futile. So yes, it is important to get a second opinion, but from the right source. Second opinion doesn't mean go on Google and then type in somebody's response. Is like, okay, yeah, that's my second opinion. Seek another doctor, see what they think. And maybe that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. Even if you have a family member who's a provider, it's okay to seek that opinion as well. But understand that it is important to know that this is your choice. And most of the time, I would say majority of the time, when a doctor is suggesting something, is for your benefit. So feel free to ask those questions and present your fears as they are.
Thank you both. Oh, Pastor, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add something as a layman also, because I don't think the doctor always to respond to that question. As somebody who is a patient also, but I've also worked in healthcare for a while, so I have a little bit of idea, not in the clinical side, more on the financial side. Like they said, please ask the doctor your questions and listen to the answers that they have. Tell them about your fears, and let them respond to it. Because in this country, the way the system works, you must be a partner with the doctor in your care. But I think what is dangerous is if, for example, you go here, somebody's YouTube posting, oh, I took this medication and it did this to me and it nearly killed me. So it's not good. That is one person, even if it's true. Most of these medications have gone through clinical trials using control groups, giving people placebos and so on and so. And they have looked at the data and the statistics. It's been examined before it was approved. So don't go by somebody's testimony somewhere. I remember some time ago, I watched something on YouTube about how these statins are dangerous, and so you can stop taking them. So I stopped taking them, and then my cholesterol shot through the roof. But I went to my doctor and I said, doctor, this is what I heard. And he sat down with me and said, look, you are the perfect candidate for statins. Because when we gave you the medication, every 6 months, we checked your liver function and it was perfect. There was no change. So this medicine is a right fit for you. One time, another doctor told me that for you, even though I don't have a cholesterol problem, but this medicine is good for your cardiovascular health because your numbers look very good, and we think because of this medicine. So why should I listen to somebody talking on YouTube about how statins are dangerous? That person, I don't even know them. You know, whether even what they are saying is true. So let's present what you've heard to your doctor and let them respond to it. And if what you are saying is true, most doctors will withdraw it. And let me say this, I know when I say we should trust doctors, I'm not saying all doctors are angels, but all my years in the healthcare industry, I worked on the financial side. And I used to meet with doctors a lot to make decisions. And one thing I saw about these doctors and nurses, they are so passionate about their patients. Whilst I was very passionate about the bottom line for the company. A lot of them don't care about money. They care about their patients getting well. That's what gives them joy. So that's why I find it very difficult when people, you know, unless somebody is running the clinic like a business, then it's a different thing. But the average doctor, what drove them into medicine is to help people. So I'm not saying they are perfect. So a lot of mistrust there on the internet about doctor this and that kind of stuff. Let's be careful what we're listening to. Thank you.
And I wanted to add that everything that has been said is great, but I also want to add that number one, as a patient, you should be your own advocate for your health. A lot of times, most of us, when I say us, I mean the African American community or the African community. When we go to the clinic or the doctor and the doctor says something, we just say, okay, yes, okay. And we get up and we come home. They write the prescriptions and we don't know what they have written for us. So being our own advocate means you need to ask the questions and have these conversations. Remember, the doctor has a license that they are protecting. So the doctor is not going to intentionally give you something that is bad for you. Also, medications have interactions with other things. It could be as simple as supplements or over-the-counter things that we do. Maybe somebody took the medicine and it can be a bad interaction with something like coffee or chocolate or something like that. But if you don't know that the person did what they're not supposed to be doing, taking that drug, you think that drug is not right for you. So it's very important to be honest. Let them know, especially those of us from Africa, you might be taking some herbs on the side. Tell the doctor that I'm using these things as home remedies as well, because remember, all these tree barks and herbs and supplements and things work on the kidneys, work on the liver, and all it can cause interactions. So be your advocate, be open, be honest. Tell them what you're doing at home as home remedies, and also ask the questions. Oftentimes, when I call my older aunties and stuff, and I ask them, so when you went to the doctor, what did the doctor say? Oh, they wrote this medicine. What is the medicine for? They don't know. Why did the doctor give you this medicine? They don't know. Ask the doctor. Tell them your concerns, tell them your fears before you come out of the clinic, so that when you're walking out, you're confident. You also have the right to refuse care. You have the right not to take your medicine. But remember, the doctor is there for your well-being. The doctor is licensed to practice what you're doing. So they're also there to protect you. Some insurances also have other resources to be able to help you manage your health better, which is by providing maybe disease management nurses that can call you. They can call you about your weight. They can call you about your cholesterol level. They can call you about maybe your lung health, or we should take advantage of these resources, because as much as the insurance wants to reduce cost, they also want to be able to make sure that all their clients are healthy as well. Thank you.
Thank you all four panelists for answering that question. We have a few more audience questions I'd like to get to. So if we could briefly get to those questions, that would be great. And the first one that I'd like to bring up is then I'd like to direct this to Mrs. Aishun. So back to you, because something that we talked about, you and I talked about in our discussion prior to this, you had talked about the importance of trust, and if people telling you things, maintaining a level of trust, and also keeping those things in confidence. And that relates to a question that someone asked. They asked, what do you say to a friend who says to you in confidence that at times they feel like killing themselves?
Okay, that's a good one. So if a friend, a family member, anyone is telling you about killing themselves, it's important to ask them about their plan. As weird as it may sound, you want to know, wow, I'm so sorry to hear that. So how do you plan on going about it? This question might give you the feel of whether it's just one of those days they're having a bad day and they're just feeling like, oh, or they can tell you, because one of the steps before suicide is actually having a plan. People that are depressed or want to commit suicide have thought about a plan. They have a plan in their mind. So if it's your friend, you want to ask them how long they've been thinking about it and if they have a plan. If they have a plan and they tell you, oh, I have this and this is how I'm going to go about it, you want to know if they've done it before, if they have tried it. At that point, it's critical. That's where it gets critical for you to call a suicide prevention line, call their doctor, call their parent, especially if the person is in college or is your roommate or something. That is where you intervene based on the answers that they give you, especially when they have a plan.
Thank you, Ms. Aishun. I'm glad you also mentioned resources because I will be sharing some resources towards the end of the conversation as well, just so everybody's aware of that. And then we have a couple questions that I think I'm going to try and tie together, and I'll like for either Dr. Olele or Dr. Sackey to take these questions. The first one was, is medication the only effective solution to treating psychological/anxiety disorders? And then someone also asked, should phobias be handled with medication? So we'll talk about medication with psychological or anxiety disorders and phobias.
I would say whenever I evaluate somebody, sometimes I even tell them, you know what, based off what I'm hearing, I'm a prescriber, I'm licensed to prescribe medications, but there's sometimes where I'm like, you know what, you need therapy. Therapy will be based off hearing your symptom, what's going on in your life. I think therapy is gonna be the first option for you. Then if that doesn't work, then we'll go over to medication management. And here's the thing, anxiety, everybody has a root cause of their anxiety, what triggers them. I've always asked patients, what is your anxiety trigger? Because a lot of times we all have a situation, we see the situation, and all of a sudden we have these automatic thoughts that start coming in and causing us this anxiety, and we behave a certain way. We have physiological symptoms, and the way that's how our body's responding it, because our bodies we're under attack from this threat. And a threat could be a thought or a situation. And so that's why it's very important to find a therapist or somebody who you'll be able to talk to. They'll find out this root cause, where it is, and they may give you homework and assignments, and they may be doing certain sessions to see how they could expose you to something. They might get exposure therapy to see like how to combat this fear, whatnot. And that's why it's very important as the person seeking help to do the homework, do what the therapist tells you to do, because they're not doing this to punish you, but they're doing it to help you get stronger and address the symptoms or the responses you're getting from your anxious thoughts, or just generally the anxiety disorder, or even your phobia. But then after the therapist has tried so many different techniques and things are not sticking, again, they're going to make a referral or consult their psychiatrist colleague, who will, after collaborating with the patient and the therapist, find out what was taking place. Then in these cases, I'll say, based off you're doing therapy for the past 2 years and you're kind of still in the same situation, there may be a reason why. So medication's here to assist that. And I go again in the process of, I explain the drug, I talk about the benefits of the medication and how long it takes for the medication to work. It could take about 4 to 6 weeks or a month, and we may have to dose it up. Then I also, I always tell about the risks as well. I explain the risks of each medication, and I let my patients know that these are possibilities, and not everybody. And so when somebody that's dealing with anxiety or phobia is hearing this, it may make their anxiety more, but I always tell them, knowledge is power. So it's better for you to know how a medication can potentially react, so you're more aware of if you're nauseous, if you're getting headaches, if you're getting easy bruising. So these are things to pay attention to. So when we have our next appointment, you could tell me what's been going on, and I could say, hey, we either reduce the dose of the medication or switch it up to something else. And this is what we call, how Pastor George talked about, a partnership. So you have to also collaborate with them and tell them what's going on with your body, because at the end of the day, you are the person that is the expert of your body and your life. The doctor and the therapist are there to assist you. So it's a partnership with everybody.
Yeah, you said, I want to add to, in regards to the central question of if medications are the only solution, even outside of just therapy, there are physiological changes or conditions that can induce anxiety as well. I mentioned this a bit earlier, but there are a few patients where I get labs on them before I even start talking about medications or anything. I recognize that, oh, they have a high thyroid activity, which can actually precipitate anxiety. And so it's like you have this untreated condition here where you're feeling these symptoms of anxiety. Of course, it can have like a downstream effect, but sometimes it's actually a medical condition that is untreated, or a medical condition that wasn't really paid attention to. I had another patient who came to me and said they're dealing with anxiety and so forth. I'm asking them about their lifestyle. They tell me they drink a pot of coffee every morning. It's like, well, that's gonna heighten up your drive, your autonomic drive, and so that's gonna present like anxiety-like symptoms. So it even comes down as simple as those things. And I don't want to say medical conditions are simple, but sometimes it's something that medically wasn't paid attention to. Sometimes it's lifestyle patterns that wasn't looked at. And I just also want to add there as well with what Dr. Olele was saying. Sometimes there are situations where if a patient comes to me and we've done all the background check and everything, and they're severe enough in the fact that it's to a point where they can't even go to work, sometimes you do start with the medication there to kind of get them back to that baseline, because they need to be able to function. But at the same time, we have to be very careful, and because this can happen very quickly or very commonly in anxiety. You have to identify whether you're using a medication as a crutch, especially when you're given something to take as needed, or when you have an anxiety attack, or when you feel like anxiety is going to pile up. Sometimes when they rely on the medication to sort of solve their problems and it prevents them from solving it at the core. So prescribers have to be also very careful about that. And yeah, you may have needed for an emergency situation, but to what point are you just avoiding dealing with the problem, identifying the trigger and helping to work through it, and just simply, I'm just going to take a medication whenever I feel like it's coming on, because you're never really going to solve that problem. And you miss, at that point, the medication is being misappropriated. But there's so many different things. And again, it comes all down to communicate, advocate for yourself, tell them how you're feeling, tell them a response, try to dig through it and identify that there's so many different components to it. And hopefully by working together as a team, you can come to the appropriate solution.
Great. We have a couple final audience questions, and we could just briefly get responses to those. The first one I will direct to Pastor George. Someone asked, how do we ensure that people who are in leadership positions, like Sunday school teachers or youth leaders, etc., in the church, how do we ensure that they're cognizant of mental illnesses and trained when engaging with children and adults who struggle with it?
I think the only way is training, exposing them to give them a basic understanding of some of these things. In fact, recently I've spoken about even training Sunday school teachers in simple things like CPR and the Heimlich maneuver. Because I realized that when, for example, among Africans in movies, when somebody passes out, they don't do CPR, they pour water on the person, which I think is very weird, So it's something I'm thinking. I'm glad that this has come up also, and we need, it's something we need to incorporate in our training. When we do the health, for example, the health fair, we do CPR training and all of these things. And even in the church, we do have a healthcare team of nurses and healthcare professionals who watch out for these things. There was one time we were having a service and somebody passed out. They called 911, but they took the blood pressure, everything. They found it was a high blood pressure and so on, but the person was okay after a while and they came to thank. We don't make these things public, but I think the Sunday school level, yes, we need to probably do some training. And and I think it's very important that we, the church gets involved in care also. That's why we do the healthcare. So we will do some training on it. Yes.
Great, and this is the beginning, right? So now that we're having this conversation, opening the door. Yes.
I've been thinking about the CPR and those issues, but I think that the mental health part is also very, very important. Suicide rates are so high, and we need to know how to respond immediately. Like Annie said, we need to know what to do when somebody gives a sign that they are going through some stress or tension. What do we do? Yes. Thank you.
And the final audience question that we had, someone mentioned that in the past couple of years, they've gone to more than 5 funerals of dynamic, brilliant young people who committed suicide. So their question is, how can we raise awareness in our culture? And I think I'd first like to direct this one to Dr. Sackey. From our conversation, you talked about, your reason for pursuing mental health, or rather mental health pursuing you. So I'd like to direct this question to you.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think it's probably the big the theme of what this is and what this represents. Everyone coming here today and choosing to spend your Friday evening to talk with your pastor and a few healthcare providers, of course, a wonderful about mental health, it is the beginning of raising that awareness. I think for years, especially I'm a Ghanaian, and within my community or our community, I know I see a lot of Ghanaians here just off of the names, which is beautiful. But culturally, we don't at all even consider mental health to be something to discuss, talk about, right? When we talk about even the concept of mental health, if there's anything that we can take away from this talk today, there should not be an association of weakness with mental illness. Again, if you see someone with a broken leg, you're not going to ask them to go for a run or walk with you. You're not going to say that they're weak because they can't walk. There's an injury there. There's something that needs to be attended to be healed. Now, in order for us to even understand how mental health can be similar to something like a broken leg, we have to have these conversations. For me personally, as I've now mentioned, I felt like mental health pursued me because it wasn't something I was looking to get into. I wasn't passionate about mental health or anything. But what I did notice about the people around my life, there are several instances of individuals struggling with mental health condition. I unfortunately had a friend who died of suicide as a result of pretty much neglecting to treat the condition or understand that there is something that needs to be managed. She had bipolar disorder. And even at my interaction with them, at that point, I didn't really know too much about mental health. And I would just simply say, just follow what your doctor is telling you. I'm sure that they're right. But if I knew a bit more about what mental health is and what it represents, I can advocate for it just as much as I would advocate for like exercise and, take care of your heart, take care of your mind, take care of your spirit. These are all very critical things. And for years, unfortunately, we've seen so much mental health outcomes that have built up, especially in our Black communities. And we don't know how many people that are walking around today with depression and PTSD, but because it has become a norm in our society, sort of our reactions and behaviors, we start to almost accept or assume that some of these things that we do on a day-to-day basis is normal. But a lot of us are suffering from compounded years of neglected mental health. And once we start to talk about it, have these conferences like that, connect the church with these health conditions, with our minds, that's when we start to open up that gateway and understand that it is okay to seek treatment. It's okay. It's not a weakness. It is a condition in which, just like anything else, we should be able to pay attention to it and ultimately understand that in order to be our best version for ourselves, we can advocate for all the policies. We can try to be the best mentors, try to be the best leaders. If our minds aren't clicking, like Dr. Olele said, this is your CPU. If that's not operating appropriately, everything else can falter. So I'm hoping that with conversations like this, we can continue to build that awareness. Everyone here can share some of the positive news that you learned today with the next person and continue to have that conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I also want to say that this is very important for us to be very observant of others, your friends, family, and even your church members that you fellowship with. You want to look at the warning signs. Is this person losing interest in the activity? Start noticing they're maybe not coming to church, or they're not doing their normal things that bring them joy. Have you started paying attention to them giving away a lot of their possessions? Are they talking about death and dying or killing themselves? So these are just some of the things you need to look for. And so those are some of the warning signs, or they're feeling hopeless about life. They don't see a future, because a lot of times I would ask patients, oh yeah, I mean, just to gauge to see if they have a vision looking. So if they start talking about, yeah, next summer I'm planning to I'm going to a vacation, or I'm looking forward to school, I know there's hope and they got a future. But when somebody starts saying, I can't think past next week, I can't think past you want to see where they're thinking. And so you really want to really engage and observe somebody's patterns, and because these are small, subtle warning signs that you're noticing with your friend or family members. So I think that's important. And then risk factors could be if they have a mental illness that's untreated or it's very severe. So you also want to make sure that they're still seeking their professional help, or they're taking their medications. So that's one of the risk factors. And even like times like COVID has devastated our community, where there's a lot of loss. And so when you've lost your jobs, you lost loved ones, there may not be enough hope, to continue. And so some people may want to say, you know what, I think this is it. So everybody has their threshold of what they want to handle. So that's why it's very important. And I think this is the beauty of the church, is that there's hope, faith, and acknowledging people, letting people know that we each have a purpose in life. So that's one of the big things that I do as a psychiatrist, looking at mind, body, spirit. I also touch on the spiritual side of things with my patients, saying you do have purpose in life. We're all meant to bring, like our Pastor George said, we're all meant to share our gifts in the world. And a lot of times people don't feel that they have a gift to share. But I'm like, you are an expert and a king of something. And it's just now you finding out what it is and serve people. And that will keep you alive. That's something that's life-giving. Like my calling is mental health, and I'm passionate about it. And so that's one of the things, is to bring hope. And I think that's one of the best things the church could do, is bring hope to people and also provide resources. And then here's the suicide hotline number, 1-800-273-TALK. That's a suicide hotline number, where if somebody's is in crisis, they could call that number, and there's a trained professional to speak with somebody. And you could always also call 911 or go to your nearest ER as well in crisis. So these are different little tips and resources you could provide. And also a person could also text the crisis hotline you could text the word home to 741-741. And you're able to also speak with a crisis counselor via text as well.
And thank you, Dr. Olele, for also mentioning those resources. If you didn't catch that, don't worry. We do have a resource list that we'll be sharing, and those like specific resources that he mentioned will be on there, so no worries. And since we're nearing the end of this panel, Dr. Sackey and Dr. Olele, you've already kind of given us some of your final thoughts. So Pastor George and Mrs. Aishan, are there any final takeaways, thoughts that you kind of want to share with the audience as it pertains to mental health?
Incidentally, one of the topic I want to talk about tomorrow, on Sunday at church is how valuable human beings are in God's scheme of things. And I think there are two views to looking at it. First of all, you are valuable. God values, that's why he put it here for a purpose. So don't let the problem that you encounter cause you not to meet that purpose. And secondly, also, if human beings are valuable, we need to care for one another. I think in a society like America here, one of the biggest issues, which I think goes into, leads to mental health issues is loneliness. People don't have anybody to talk to. Mm-hmm. So let's make friends with people. So you see somebody in church every day, they come, they go. One day run, catch up with them and talk to them. And you'll be surprised, somebody you sit with in the metro every day who is alone, talk to them. And you don't know what difference you can make in somebody's life. Those are the parting thought that I want to share with you.
Mrs. Aishan?
Okay. I also want to share that as each one of us spoke, we talked about triggers, things that increases our anxiety, things that cause us to be depressed, things that will change our moods. It's important that if you notice certain things are triggering you in a negative way, to avoid it or to stay away from it. I noticed that over the 2020, a whole lot of news, sitting by the TV, watching the news and watching everything that was going on a lot was triggering a lot of people. Even people had trouble breathing just by watching the news. So if you identify the things that are triggering you, it's important to take a walk, step away from it, and do something about it. Another thing that I also wanted to say is, the earlier question about very brilliant people and interesting, educated people dying from suicide. Sometimes some people know that they're having issues with their depression or mood, or other times too, they may not. Another thing that I also want us all to be observant about is a lot of people might not show the classical symptoms. A lot of people who know it, the learned people, the educated people, might mask it. A lot of people can mask it with comedy. They can mask a lot of it with humor and cover it up. So when you just have a glimpse of what's going on, let's say you have a friend who was very neat, organized in school, and you go to the person's home and you realize that everything is all over the place. The person is not showering that much. The person doesn't care whether their clothes are ironed, changes like that. You should bring up these conversations and talk about it with the person. Sometimes they may avoid it, but you can also call these helplines and do a three-way call and get the person on the phone. Once the person at the other end initiates a conversation with the person, you have handed the person over to them so that we can all get the assistance we need. And we should also remember that mental health is very fragile, just like day-to-day health or our physical health is fragile. So we should take this very seriously and do all we can to protect it so that our spirits will live in a sound body as well, including a sound mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And since we do have a few more minutes left, I'll leave the floor open if there's any maybe final or pressing thoughts that any of the panelists want to share, or if there's one more question that somebody wants to send in the chat.
I guess, while we wait for any other questions, I mentioned this before, and I think it's something that a lot of people should consider. You know, the way that we have our regular primary care doctors, right? You have your doctor who's checking up on you, your physical once a year, twice a year. I think it's important for us to also have a counselor or a therapist that can check on us. We have that mental maintenance once or twice a year, because even though you feel like everything's okay, you may feel like you're going about life and as smooth as possible, nothing wrong. I think it's important to get that mental maintenance check. Sometimes we're going 100 miles per hour. We don't know that we're burning out. We're not connecting like we used to. And sometimes our friends, our family, or even ourselves, we don't recognize it. And like what Nurse Annie mentioned, there are going to be people who don't show the classical symptoms of depression. And then it comes almost crashing down at one moment. I think it's important for us to get these maintenance checks. I myself, I have a therapist. And there was a point myself, in all transparency and vulnerability, I had to get on medications to help treat my anxiety. And I like sharing stories like that because I want people to understand that we are humans. I may look like, you know, I have these awards and everything's going great, but it came with some mental struggle in some certain situations in my life, and I had to take care of myself in order to continue going. And so I want to encourage everyone again, instead of viewing it as a weakness, it's empowerment. You're taking control of your health. You're taking control of what matters. You're, like Pastor says, you have a purpose here, and you're actually obeying God by maintaining that health so that you can fulfill that purpose. So get checked, even if you feel okay. Evaluate your mind from time to time. Take the breaks that's necessary. And if you're triggered by certain things, you know, pay attention to it and seek the care and have the support of the people around you, including the church, family, and friends, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you for your transparency, Dr. Sackey. And we'll close or conclude with the final comment from Dr. Olele.
This was a blessing to be here tonight, talking about mental health and how it affects the body and our spirit. And I just want to leave like the human to human, like I always tell my patients, your life is beautiful. And I always say this, that, you know, you're made by God, and there's some pains that you may experience, but the pains that you experience, you're able to share that with others and help others behind you. So that's the beauty of being unique and being yourself. You are who you are, and be comfortable be who you are, and stop worrying about comparing yourself to others. So that's one of the things that I love to talk with my patients about. I love to get to know them and who they are. And overall, like everybody here has said, if you're struggling with something, go see a mental health provider. Google them, look at reviews, so that you know that you're going to somebody that other people have vetted, and look at their testimonials. Check out social media to see if they're a doctor or a nurse practitioner or whoever you're going to see, that you feel comfortable with them. And do your due diligence. If you feel not comfortable, get a second opinion or even a third opinion, whatever you need to do to feel comfortable with your choice. And all in all, I want to say that, you know, God has his hands on you, and just be around people that uplift you and are not bringing you down and not toxic to your life.
Mama, there's one question here. Somebody is asking about seeking mental health adversely affecting you professionally. Let me say this: most employers now have EAP programs, employee assistance programs in the workplace. They rather want you to get help because of the stress in the workplace and all that. And I think also there are specific laws in this country now, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, which protects your medical records. So it can't be used against you at work. So it's better to get help early than to have a mental breakdown at work. Any employer who is sensible will appreciate it if you take time off work to get help with your, mental health. That's a comment I just wanted to throw in from that question. I think it's critical.
Great. Thank you all so much again. Thank you, audience, as well, for coming and for asking your questions. I really hope that this discussion was impactful. It was encouraging. I hope you gained a lot from this conversation. And please note that this is, like I said, I feel like this is more of an introductory conversation. God willing, we'll be able to continue having these conversations now that the floor has been open, now that we made this space for talking about mental health. So of course, again, thank you for your engagement. And of course, thank you, Pastor George, again, for honoring my request to have you on this panel. Thank you, Dr. Olele. I really appreciate you coming out tonight and dedicating time to speak. Thank you, Mrs. Ashun, for your insight as well. And thank you, Dr. Sackey, for your transparency and for just coming here and being so willing to engage with us today. And in closing, as I mentioned, there are some resources. I'm going to drop in the chat the link to a mental health resource list. So it does have some of the resources that Dr. Olele had mentioned, and I'll, as well as some other ones. So I'm just going to send that really quickly. And if you have any final comments in the chat, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you want to, thank the panelists or any other things you want to say, feel free to drop it in these last 2 minutes that we have here.
And also, I wanted to say that on social media, I love to educate on mental health.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you can follow me at Dr. Olele, DoctorOlele on IG, and also my practice, Genesis Psychiatric Solutions at GPS Mindset. And we enjoy educating people about mental health. And I had a video recently about panic attack symptoms. So yeah, check it out. So, but this was a great program, and I commend your church for being leaders and initiating this important conversation.
And then also just a few other just another announcement. Our church, of course, we've had this conversation. We've had other conversations on different topics, and so I also wanted to make you all aware of those as well. We've had one talking about choosing a life partner, one about building wealth for millennials, Christians and race relations, challenging your inner Godfidence, so boosting your self-esteem, talking about surviving college. We've also, our last one was also about sex. So I'm just gonna post those links in the chat, and feel free to share them with other people, and add this to the discussion, the conversation. Yeah, we just want you all to stay engaged, stay connected, and that's all I have for today. So have a good night, and once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. And thank you, Abna. Great job. Thank you, Pastor, for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming too.
No, it was my honor. Thank you.
Thank you.